Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to The Discerning Gamer. I just wanted to make a quick video on Steel Division, updating on a few tidbits from the forums and from various press articles to keep people up to date and sort of give you some idea as to what you can expect from the game based on what's been sort of released publicly and not under NDA. Speaking of NDA, I am in the VIP closed beta. Unfortunately, there is a very restrictive NDA on it that means that I can't mention anything about it, from what's in it to even my experiences with it or just how it makes me feel. So I'm going to keep tight-lipped on that one, but as soon as the NDA is lifted, I'll be giving full impressions and putting up footage. One point that we can speculate on without breaching any sort of NDA is the fact that we are already at beta stage so quickly after the game has been announced. I think that means that there's been a lot of development going on behind the scenes without us realizing it, and that the PR cycle for Steel Division will be relatively short. So that means, you know, make a big announcement and basically try and maintain that hype through a couple of months by rapidly releasing lots of information and whipping people into a fervor, and then releasing the game shortly after, rather than doing a sort of teaser trailer or an announcement trailer a year in advance or something like that. Raven, who is a veteran member of the community for Eugen Games, is speculating that we're going to get a release on the 6th of June, which is of course the date of the initial D-Day landings, and that would seem like a pretty good bet to me, as long as it's not deemed to be historically insensitive, maybe. So on to the little tidbits that I've picked up on over the last couple of weeks. First of all, the historical attention to detail here is very encouraging. Obviously, we've just had the first developer diary on the 101st Airborne, and that goes into a good bit of detail about their campaign in Normandy, the leadership, the preparation in the run-up to it. But also, Mad Matt has been sporadically posting on the forums with some really encouraging research that points to how the divisions in the game are going to be modelled very closely around the real divisions that took part in the conflict. Pardon me. For example, he gave an anecdote about the 21st Panzer Division, where most of its equipment came from Baukommando Becker, which was a workshop managed by one of Rommel's subordinates, Major Becker, and that he mentioned that for the 21st, half of their equipment was kind of standard German Panzer Division equipment, but the other half was French or French modified vehicles because they were under strength, and that as a result, Becker mounted a Pak 40 on a French Unix half-track months before the official German anti-vehicle half-track entered service. And I just think it's little details like this and little bits of respect for the history that are going to make this game potentially really interesting and rich and engaging, and give the divisions a lot of interesting flavour. So he also made another point about the use of Italian weapons in German divisions, and how they had a very mixed track record of producing some pretty garbage armoured vehicles, but also having things like the very good submachine gun design that was favoured by the German Fallschirmjäger and actually taken into Normandy, and actually producing, for example, the Semmervente assault guns, which were commandeered by Germans whenever they could lay their hands on it, and the Auto Blinder 41 armoured car, as well as a 90mm anti-aircraft gun. So, interestingly, I'm not 100% on the history. I don't think there were Italian divisions present at Normandy, but perhaps we'll get a sprinkling of Italian units or Italian equipment in German divisions in the conflict, which will be really nice as kind of a touch of spice, as it were, to what we consider traditional German forces. So we've also seen a little tidbit that medium artillery and lower will be called into the game as an actual physical unit that you can control. However, big guns like the perhaps German Dora guns or the naval fire support will be off-map call-ins. Now, it's interesting because we haven't seen off-map call-ins apart from planes in the War Game series, so I'm wondering how those are going to be handled. Will we have a artillery spotter unit that's going to direct the fire for that, or will it be just a more traditional RTS feature where you've kind of got it in a sidebar and you can click it and drop it on the enemy? That remains to be seen, but interesting to know. A few notes from some of the mainstream games media coverage on this, and that's that we're going to get 18 divisions in total, 3 separate single-player campaigns, 1 per division, and it's going to be an American, German and British division that will feature in each of the 3 campaigns, and also that we're going to have a persistent division over the course of that, and at certain junctures within the campaign we will be able to refresh or resupply our division, but that'll be based on the historical factors that were affecting the division at the time. So, for example, if the American division happens to be the 101st Airborne, we're not going to be able to resupply for the first couple of missions until we've completed the D-Day landing, for example, and we've resupplied with forces. Or if, for example, they're besieged in Bastogne, we're not going to be able to reinforce them then. I think this is actually a great touch because it's going to put in some kind of planning to the campaign and make you feel as the historical pressures and tension that division was going through at that phase in the war, and also ratchet up the tension in the actual game, because if you're playing in a position where you've got your back really up against the wall and you're pretty sure you're not going to have reinforcements for the next 3 missions, just losing a single platoon of infantry is going to be really impactful, and you're going to feel that. So it's a great way of kind of making the player care a bit more about unit preservation. One of the articles also noted that there will be no health bars in the game. We've already seen from some of the screenshots that they've released that you can see the number of infantrymen present in a squad, but I'm guessing this is going to apply to tanks and other vehicles that we no longer have a health bar. And I suppose that is more accurate in terms of the modelling of tanks, because it tends to be, if you get hit and your armor's dinged, then that's not going to reduce your health, and you might get penetrated and it goes straight through and doesn't hit the crew or damage any of the internal components, and therefore you're still technically at full health despite the hole in your armor. So I kind of like the way that's being modeled, but interestingly we are going to see suppression not only on infantry units but tanks as well, so you can stress the crew out. That's something we haven't seen in other games before, and something that I think will be a great addition. It's mentioned in a rock paper shotgun preview that shells and bullets can either be seen punching through or deflecting from armor. First of all, that's going to look awesome from a graphical standpoint and be kind of intuitive in terms of when you're playing the game and how it looks and judging the efficacy of your units. But I love the idea of being able to stress out a tank crew, because even if you had something like a Tiger rolling into a town, if it's on its own and it's surrounded by infantry who are able to be constantly throwing light anti-tank grenades at it or hitting it with light weapons that might not be able to penetrate its armor, you're still going to be able to force it off, or model some of the fact that yes, it's a really heavily armored tank, but it's not a fortress on its own. It can't take the battlefield. It is a force multiplier and something that has to be employed effectively. So that's going to be a really interesting mechanic to see how that pans out. Another interesting note from the Polygon interview was that Alexis Ladresse, who is I think the co-founder of Eugen, noted that they chose Normandy as the setting for the game because they're French, so they know it well. They have kind of unlimited access to the site and I suppose a personal connection to the history. But he also noticed, he also said this, and quote, "It's much easier to access these places, and also when you start a franchise, the thing you do will be the most difficult because you have to explore." the first thing you do will be the most difficult because you have to explore. Notice that he said when you start a franchise. So that's encouraging. If the game's good, and I'm pretty hopeful for it at the moment, we could be seeing other Steel Division entries across different battlefields with different divisions. And as I mentioned in my first video, the partnership with Paradox as the publisher is the perfect one to enable that to happen, because obviously they are kind of known for committing deeply to their AAA franchises and offering a lot of content and depth and fostering, a very dedicated community that they then continue to sell good content to off of a base platform. Another little note about the gameplay as well is that we're actually going to see command units now. So I don't know if these guys are going to affect the front line or how that moves, but what they have been noted to do in the articles is provide a morale boost to all nearby units, and that reduces the effects of stress and suppression dramatically. So that's another really interesting kind of take on the gameplay. If you want a rifle section, for example, to charge a machine gun, it's probably going to be a lot more effective if they've got a kind of bold and heroic officer behind them urging them onwards. But also, I suppose, then it provides the enemy with something to snipe. And imagine if, for example, being within the area of influence of a command officer, when it dies, creates a massive morale shock to the units around it. Then suddenly the sort of dance between protecting the command officer and utilizing his bonus and sniping him to cause a rout in the enemy will be a really interesting bit of micro back and forth. And it kind of harkens back to Wargame Red Dragon, where if you took out the enemy's predominant kind of AA units, suddenly they're wide open to get hit by jets and helicopter gunships and things like that. And I think that's a really nice back and forth to see at high level play, and a great design decision. It was also noted in an interview that the when Eugen does larger maps, or the more players added to the game, the map is going to get wider rather than go deeper. So in Wargame, we saw as the player count increased or the map size increased, it was almost as if you selected the box that the map was and dragged it diagonally, so it got bigger on its X and Y axis, so it just became functionally larger. Whereas it looks like now, what they want to do is provide a more immediate front line that you're fighting over, but as more players go, it's going to get wider and wider, so it'll be more about grand flanks and encircling maneuvers and increasing the pace of the game. I think as well, perhaps because of the phase system, we're going to see less units on the battlefield right from the start of the game, and more of a kind of trickle up and build up of forces. And I think having a more immediate front line that has less of a travel time to get to in this game, unlike Red Dragon, will benefit us in the opening phases, because we're only going to be using a few units, and then it'll escalate and escalate rather than having a big force to push out onto the map right at the beginning of the game. So I think that sounds sensible, and perhaps it kind of mirrors the conflict of World War II a bit better than the map design that we saw in Wargame Red Dragon. So final bits of info from the first developer diary. If you haven't seen that, I'll link it below. It's each week they're going to do a developer diary covering the history and gameplay of one of the divisions that's going to be included in the game. So the first one they've picked is the American 101st Airborne. I'm not going to recount all the history and stuff. It's there in the developer diary. What I'm going to look at, in fact, is the little tidbits of information that we have about how that will affect the gameplay. So it's mentioned that infantry squads, their weapons will be very much taken into account when we decide how effective they are over various distances. So it's noted that the Americans will be very effective up close, because of course they've got their M1 semi-automatic rifles and Thompson submachine guns, but Panzer Grenadier will be much more effective over long range because they've got twin MG42 loadout. So perhaps that indicates we're going to get a more kind of intense and detailed simulation of infantry combat, more so than what we saw in Red Dragon, and I think that's definitely welcomed from me. It's also noted at the bottom that airborne units will be marked with a set of wings on their unit card, and they are not affected by being outside of their front line, so within enemy territory. Also, in that same note is that we're also going to be getting a British and German airborne division. And interestingly, this confirms a bit of the speculation that I had previously, that perhaps morale would take into account the position of your front line and friendly units, so that if, for example, you were able to create a bulge in the enemy's front line, you could then cut off the units inside of that, encircle them and capture them, which is obviously standard blitzkrieg tactics and really nice to see inside the game. And it's really nice to see that there are going to be elite units that you can put in that situation and they're not going to be adversely affected by it either. So that's really all I had to say about the various little bits of news sources and insights I've got from those. Obviously, I'm in the beta, but all of this is sort of publicly available knowledge and not specific to the beta, and I will be putting out my impressions and footage from the beta as soon as the NDA is lifted. Anyway, I hope this has provided some good insight and a nice place to put all this information together with the new screenshots that we've got. Let me know in the comments below what you think of how the game's shaping up so far, and if you've got any more insight based on what's been publicly released. Also, I'm not super familiar with all the divisions that were present in the conflict, so if there are some divisions that you'd be really excited to see, particularly if they're not very well-known divisions, pop them in the comments below, and maybe I'll make a kind of history recap video on those to let everybody else know about it. Sorry for a slightly rushed and rambly video. This didn't turn out as short as I was hoping it would. Never mind, hopefully it's been good. I've been the Discerning Gamer. Until next time.